Imagine casting your line into a lake so still, it feels alive. The ripples spread, but something pulls back, tugging harder than any fish should. Welcome, traveler. Tonight we drift into stories where waters remember, where fishermen vanish, and where the catch is never what it seems. Stay close, for the currents carry whispers no boat dares follow. Now start with first story. The winter had turned the valley into a cathedral of silence. Pines stood rigid, cloaked in snow, their shadows stretching long across the pale expanse of a lake that no one in town trusted after dark. They called it Gray Mirror, though in the frozen months it reflected nothing. Its surface turned to dull glass, milky and opaque, as if hiding what lay beneath. You stood there once, boots pressing faintly into the snowpack, breath pluming in the icy air. The fishermen had gone out ahead of you, dragging sleds with augers, nets, and small stools. Their laughter was muffled, quickly swallowed by the immensity of silence that lingered above the ice. It was the kind of silence that pressed against your ears, the kind that made you aware of your own heartbeat. The men spread out across the lake, choosing their spots. Some marked places where they swore fish gathered in abundance, others where the ice seemed thickest. But as you watched them, you noticed how their movements changed once they settled. Laughter faded. Conversations broke into murmurs. And then, the first one said it. "Do you hear it?" The others fell still, heads cocked. Beneath their boots, the ice carried a sound, a soft, measured sigh, like air escaping from lungs far below. It wasn't the crack of shifting ice. It wasn't the groan of frozen water. It was breathing. One man tapped his boot lightly, and the breath quickened, as though startled. Another knelt, pressing his gloved palm flat against the frost. He jerked it back with a muttered curse. "Warm," he said, "too warm for ice." Still, hunger for fish pushed them forward. The auger bit into the lake, carving a hole with shrill squeals. The sound reverberated unnaturally, like drilling into hollow bone. When the final layer broke, it wasn't cold air that rushed upward. It was warmth, mist curling into the winter sky, carrying a damp, brackish scent that clung to their clothes. One man laughed uneasily, saying the lake had held its breath too long. But his chuckle was brittle, soon lost. They baited hooks, lowered lines, and waited. The mist thickened, drifting along the frozen surface like ghosts. And then came the first tug. It was violent, dragging the rod down with a force no trout could possess. The fisherman gripped the handle, knuckles whitening, boots skidding against the slick surface. He shouted for help, and two others clutched his arms. The line quivered, strained, and then snap. The hook came up twisted, the wire bitten clean through. "Teeth," someone whispered. The wind picked up, scattering powder across the lake. Yet beneath the gust, the sound returned. Not one sigh, but many, dozens, perhaps hundreds, rising from beneath the ice. The fishermen staggered back, faces pale, as the ice itself seemed to pulse with sound. One knelt again and pressed his ear to the lake. His face drained of blood. "Voices," he whispered. It's voices whispering." When they drilled another hole, more mist rose. This time it carried something else, knocking. Gentle at first, rhythmic, as though knuckles rapped from the other side. It grew louder, insistent, until the ice trembled faintly beneath their boots. The men stared at each other, wordless. Some fled back to the tree line, sleds scraping hastily across the snow. Others lingered, transfixed, drawn to the hollow rhythm below their feet. The knocking spread, circling beneath them, moving from one hole to the next as though something tracked their positions. The sound was deliberate, intelligent. One man could not resist. He leaned close to the hole, peering into the misty dark. He whispered down, asking what wanted to come through. Silence answered him. Silence, and then an answering whisper, faint, echoing his own words back to him. But the voice was warped, bubbling, gurgling with water. He scrambled backward, choking on fear. But the others had seen it too, movement in the water below. Not fish, not shadows of weeds, but faces. Pale, distorted faces rising against the ice, mouths open, exhaling fog through hairline cracks. Dozens of them. Some pressed against the holes, teeth gnashing, eyes rolling white. The fishermen screamed, scattering across the lake. The ice buckled beneath their flight, cracking with sharp, splintering groans. One man slipped, landing hard. The surface beneath him split, and the mist roared upward like steam from a boiling kettle. He vanished in seconds, pulled into blackness. The hole sealed behind him with a hiss of slush, as though swallowing him whole. Those who escaped swore the lake shivered as they fled. They did not look back, but they felt it, a vibration in the soles of their boots, in the marrow of their bones. Breathing, always breathing. In the weeks that followed, the town avoided Grey Mirror. Children were forbidden to skate upon it. Hunters refused to cross, yet every dawn mist rose across its surface, curling in long, finger-like tendrils. At night, from the ridge above, some swore they heard it still, knocking, patient and persistent. And when spring thawed the ice, the lake remained opaque, clouded, as though holding something just beneath. No bodies surfaced, no gear drifted ashore, only silence and the occasional ripple where no fish broke. You think of them sometimes, the men who drilled too deep, who pressed their ears too close. You imagine their lungs filling, their hands clawing against invisible walls. You imagine them below, pressing upward, faces flattened against the underside of the lake, whispering through the cracks, waiting for another hole to open, and you wonder, when the ice returns next winter, when the surface hardens again, whether they will still be down there, still breathing, still knocking. The lake waits. It has always waited, and as the mist rises, curling like smoke across the water, another story drifts along the river's edge, one where the hooks come back red, catching more than fish. Now start with second story. The river ran slow in that part of the county, meandering through farmland and marsh, its water brown and heavy with silt. They called it Hollow Bend, a lazy curve that swallowed more than it ever returned. Locals said it had a mouth, not a flow, and what went in did not come back the same. On fogged mornings, you could stand on its banks and hear the soft gurgle of water turning upon itself, as though whispering. Old men warned never to fish there, not because there were no catches, but because what did take the bait came back wrong. Hooks rose glistening red, strands of hair caught in barbs, shreds of skin clinging where scales should have been. You heard the stories first in hushed tones at a roadside diner, steam rising from mugs of weak coffee. A farmer recalled how his cousin had cast a line one night, lantern swaying by the bank. When he reeled in, he found a human finger dangling from the hook, bone exposed where flesh was chewed away. Another swore his line had snagged something soft that pulled back, tugging him toward the water with inhuman strength until the branch he tied to split clean in half. He never fished again. But rumor has a way of luring the curious, and so it was when a group of younger men ignored the warnings. They laughed as they set their rods along the bend, their coolers stacked with beer, their voices carrying over the fog. For hours nothing stirred but the ripples of carp and the occasional splash of frogs. They jeered at the old tales, saying the river was nothing but water and weeds, until the first line went taut. The man who held it grinned, bracing his boots into the mud. But the smile faltered as the rod bent double, pulled toward the current with a force too great for any freshwater catch. His friends rushed to steady him. The reel screamed, line cutting deep into the water, and when it came free, snapping upward, the bank fell into silence. The hook glistened, not with fish, but with a ragged strip of flesh. It dangled wet and red, unmistakably human. They dropped it, recoiling, laughter frozen on their lips. The strip twitched once as though still alive, before sliding back into the river's mouth. They left quickly that night, abandoning their rods, lanterns, and coolers in the mud. The sheriff's office investigated after the men spoke, reluctantly, of what they'd seen. Divers were sent in, their black suits glinting with water beneath the pale sun. They descended into the bend, tethered by ropes that swayed like umbilical cords. Hours passed before they resurfaced, their faces pale beneath fogged masks. They carried not fish but bone, first a rib cage strung across a snag of roots, then a pelvis, then skulls, 3 of them caught together as though threaded by invisible hands. The bones bore grooves, shallow and parallel, as though gnawed by teeth too small to belong to any fish. The river was dredged, combed, and searched. Authorities found more remains, dozens of them, tangled in branches beneath the current. Some were fresh with flesh still clinging. Others were yellowed, polished smooth by years of water. They never matched all the pieces. Some bodies were never identified. The sheriff declared Hollow Bend closed, roping off the banks with weather-worn tape. But rivers are not so easily tamed. Weeks later, lanterns were seen again at the bend, fishermen returning, stubborn and hungry, or perhaps drawn by something deeper. One man, a stranger passing through, ignored the tape. Locals watched from a distance as he cast his line into the bend, his lantern flickering in the mist. Hours later, his rod bent sharply, nearly pulling him from his stool. He reeled with both hands, grunting, boots sliding in mud. The water frothed, dark and violent. And then, with a wet snap, the line went slack. He pulled the hook free, staring at what dangled there. A necklace, delicate and rusted beads still strung across the line. At its end clung a scrap of jawbone, teeth still set in place. The man left without packing, lantern swinging as he vanished into the road. He was not seen again in town. They say the river remembers. Some whispered that the bend was once a burial ground, bodies tossed in after fever swept the valley long ago. Others said it was punishment for something older, a pact made and broken. But the truth was simpler and worse. Hollowbend fed itself. Fishermen who tested the water after the divers left swore their lines still twitched at night, as though something brushed against them. When reeled in, the hooks were slick with red, but never fish. Some found strands of hair caught in the barbs. Others, small bones, polished and pale. And then there was the boy. He had gone missing one autumn afternoon, last seen wandering near the water's edge with a stick, poking at cattails. The town searched for days, lanterns and torches sweeping the marshes. Dogs barked, pulled, and whimpered near the bend, but would not enter. The river remained silent, rippling only with its slow, deceptive flow. Weeks later, a fisherman cast a line by mistake, too close to the bend. His rod bent sharply, nearly dragging him under. He reeled with shaking hands, praying for carp, for anything ordinary. When the hook broke the surface, the town fell into silence. For dangling there, caught by the lip, was a child's jawbone, small teeth gleaming white in the lantern light. After that, the bend was abandoned for good. Trees grew thick around it. Reeds swallowed the banks, and fog lay heavy like a veil. But sometimes, on certain nights, a lantern's glow is seen hovering over the water, bobbing gently as though in a fisherman's hand. Locals do not investigate. They turn away whispering prayers, and if you walk the banks yourself, the mud slick and the mist pressing close, you might hear it too, the subtle tug on an unseen line, the plop of a hook cast in darkness. And when you look closer, the water ripples red, as though feeding. The river takes. It has always taken. And as the current swallows another hook, another lantern drifts into sight. This one not on land, but floating alone upon black water, its glow swaying without a hand to guide it. Now start with third story. The legend of the lantern boat was older than the dam, older than the town that grew along the river's banks. It was said to appear on nights when the air was too still, when the water mirrored the sky in perfect black glass, and when even the frogs had fallen silent. You heard of it first around a fire, logs hissing in the damp night as locals leaned close to share the story. They spoke of fishermen who stayed too long, of lovers who lingered by the shore, of travelers who mistook the glow for a beacon of safety. All of them saw the same thing, a single boat drifting across the current, no sound of paddles, no figure at the helm. Only a lantern, swinging faintly with each ripple, burning gold against the endless dark. No one knew where it came from. Some said it belonged to ferrymen who drowned centuries ago, still ferrying souls across unseen waters. Others believed it was a lure, a trick of the drowned, drawing the living closer until the waves swallowed them whole. Children were warned to turn away if they saw it, to never answer the voice that came with the light, because the boat was never silent. It whispered. One man swore he had heard his wife's voice, though she was at home, sleeping soundly in bed. Another claimed the boat called him by name, softly at first, then louder, until the sound echoed across the shore. Those who followed, stepping into the water or paddling after it, were never seen again. There was a boy who once lived on the far side of the valley. He was restless, curious, eager to prove braver than his friends. One summer night he stood by the bank when the lantern appeared, swaying across the water. His companions screamed for him to run, but the boy only laughed, saying he could see the rope, could see the trick. He waded out, water lapping at his waist, then his chest. The glow drew farther, always just beyond reach. He disappeared beneath the surface, lantern flickering once before fading into the horizon. His body was never recovered. The boat returned the following summer. It always did. Some spoke of a widow who lived near the docks, who claimed she saw the boat each year on the same night her husband had drowned. She swore it called his name and sometimes hers. Once neighbors found her standing knee-deep in the tide, eyes glazed, arms outstretched as though waiting to be pulled aboard. They dragged her back, but she never spoke again. Others told of hunters who followed the light with their rifles, paddling in silence as the glow led them farther downriver. Hours later, their canoe washed up empty, rifles stacked neatly inside, lantern soot marking the wood. The hunters were gone. You think of the lantern often, the way it sways in memory, not in reality. How it would look against the horizon, blurred by mist, flickering like a heartbeat. You wonder what it would whisper to you. Would it call your name in the voice of someone you loved? Or would it be your own voice, echoing back from the dark, calling you toward yourself? The boat is patient. It does not hurry. It drifts slowly, invitingly, as though waiting for you to follow. And those who resist, who turn away, find the whispers do not stop. At night, lying in their beds, they hear it still. Soft splashes, the creak of wood, the glow against closed eyelids. Some never sleep again. The strangest part of the legend lies not in those who vanish, but in what remains. For sometimes the boat leaves behind objects, tokens washed to shore at dawn. A ring slick with river silt, its engraving eroded. A boot with laces still tied, leather swollen with water. Once a diary floated to shore, its pages smeared but legible enough to read one phrase repeated again and again. The light knows me. The light knows my name. Folklore blurs with truth in Hollowben's shadow. Older generations swear they saw the lantern with their own eyes, bobbing across black water like a firefly too large to be natural. Younger voices dismiss it, saying it is swamp gas or trick of reflection. But each year someone disappears. Each year a name is whispered across the ripples, carried by no wind. You stand at the bank once, the mist dampening your coat, the stars swallowed in cloud. The water is so still it looks like stone, the moonlight dim. Then it appears, soft at first, then brighter. A lantern floating across the water, its glow gold and steady. No oars, no hand to guide it. Only the faint creak of wood, the sigh of water parted by a vessel that should not move. It turns toward you. The light bends, and then you hear it. Your name. Not shouted, not demanded, whispered. A voice you know well, perhaps too well. It coils around you, wrapping tighter than the mist, pulling you forward. Each step into the shallows is met with an answering whisper, louder, clearer, echoing as though from within your own chest. The lantern sways gently, patient, kind. The voice beckons, warm and familiar, promising something waiting just beyond reach. You wade farther, the cold numbing your skin, the weight of water dragging at your knees. Still, the glow remains just out of reach, leading you deeper, deeper. For a moment, you wonder if anyone else can hear. Perhaps the townsfolk stand far behind, watching, whispering warnings. Perhaps no one is there at all. Perhaps it is only you and the lantern now, locked in a slow dance across the water. The glow dims once, as though sighing, then flares brighter. You reach for it, fingers trembling. Your reflection stretches across the water, warped, split. The voice is inside you now, not just in your ears but in your bones, rattling, humming, calling you home. The lantern tilts. The flame gutters, and then it goes out. The darkness is absolute. No boat, no glow, no sound of water, but your own ragged breath. And when you turn back toward shore, it is gone too. The river has swallowed everything, and as silence lingers on the black surface, another tale rises from deeper shadows, a pond so dark it mirrors no sky at all, swallowing those who cast their lines upon it. Now start with fourth story. There was a place outside the village, down a narrow trail where moss-smothered stones and roots clawed at the path. The forest opened suddenly, a clearing of stillness, and there it lay, Black Hollow Pond. It earned its name not from shadows or depth alone, but from its surface, which reflected nothing. Not the stars, not the moon, not even the pale face of a man leaning over the water. It was a void, a window into a darkness that did not belong to this earth. Children once dared each other to fish there. They told stories of monstrous carp and trout the size of wolves. On summer nights they crept from their homes, rods clutched in small hands, hearts pounding with the thrill of disobedience. They cast lines into the stillness, laughter echoing across the hollow. But each time the bobbers stilled, each time the lines drew taut and slackened, the children found nothing. Their hooks rose empty, or worse, shredded worms, chewed as though by teeth far too sharp for pond fish. One evening, a boy cast his rod, waited, and felt a tug unlike any other. It dragged him forward, the line singing with tension. He shouted for help, boots skidding across mud. His friends grabbed his jacket, pulling him back from the water's edge. The line snapped with a crack, the hook rising clean, the metal bent nearly in half. They dropped their rods, fled into the woods, and never returned, but the pond remained. Decades later, divers were sent to explore it. Surveyors wanted to chart its depth, to see if the hollow could be drained and made useful for farmland. Two men donned suits and ropes, their oxygen tanks clinking as they prepared. Locals gathered at the edge, watching as the divers slipped into blackness. At first, the ropes played out smoothly, hand over hand, the cords vanishing into the void. 20 feet, 40, 60. The onlookers waited for the signal tug that marked bottom. None came. The rope stretched longer, wet coils piling into waiting hands. 90 feet, 100. Still nothing. Then came the first signal, 3 sharp tugs. But the pattern was wrong. It was not the divers pulling. It was something pulling back. The crowd panicked, heaving at the ropes, calling the men's names. The cord snapped upward suddenly, slack as though cut. The divers never surfaced. When the water calmed, only bubbles lingered, widening into rings before vanishing. The pond returned to silence as though nothing had stirred it at all. After that, no one tried to measure it again. Folklore grew thick around Black Hollow Pond. Some said it was bottomless, a wound in the world that led straight down to the other side. Others whispered it was a gate, an opening to a cavernous mouth that fed on those who lingered. Hunters claimed their hounds refused to drink from it, tails tucked, fur bristling. Old women swore they heard voices at dusk, calling children's names in sing-song tones. There was a tale of a girl who wandered to its edge, chasing fireflies. Her parents found her shoes on the bank, neatly placed side by side, but no trace of her remained. Searchers combed the woods, torches sweeping every tree hollow, every root-tangled ditch. They found nothing. At dawn, ripples danced across the pond's surface, though no wind stirred. Years later, a farmer recalled seeing bubbles rise one evening, thick and frothing. He thought perhaps a deer had drowned, trapped in the mire. But when he approached, the water stilled, leaving only a stench of brine and something older, something like rusted iron, something like blood. The pond never froze in winter. Snow lay thick across the forest, ice clutched rivers and creeks, but Black Hollow Pond remained liquid, steaming faintly against the frost. Hunters swore they saw shapes drifting just beneath, long pale forms with hands, not fins, brushing the surface before vanishing. One night, teenagers dared each other to row across. They dragged a boat down the trail, their lanterns swaying as they laughed to mask their fear. The oars cut silently, no ripples spreading, as though the pond swallowed every stroke. Midway across, their lantern flickered. The boy holding it swore he felt a hand brush his ankle, wet and cold. Another claimed he heard voices, muffled beneath the boat. They argued, panic rising. Then the lantern went out. The boat drifted empty to the far bank the next morning. No trace of the teenagers was ever found. The villagers speak of it less now. They avoid the hollow, letting trees reclaim the trail. Moss thickens, roots tangle, but the pond waits, its black surface unbroken. Still, sometimes at dusk, ripples form across its center, slow and deliberate, radiating outward as though something beneath has stirred. If you stand too long at the bank, silence presses against your ears, heavy as stone. You may feel the tug, not of line or hook, but of gravity itself, pulling you closer, urging you to lean forward. And if you do, if your reflection bends toward that darkness, you may see not your own face, but another, eyes wide, mouth open, staring from below. And you may realize the pond is not empty at all. It is full of those who leaned too close, of divers who sank too far, of children who cast their lines into silence, full of whispers, mouths pressed against the black glass, waiting for someone to open the surface once more. The ripples come at dusk. They always do, and as the ripples widen across that dark pond, another story drifts to shore, an old net hauled from a wreck, its knots slick with brine, carrying bones in every catch. Now start with fifth story. It was hauled up on a gray morning when the fog lay low and the gulls were silent. The men who found it said the ropes were already wet, though no tide had touched them. The net clung to the deck like something alive, knotted cords slick with rot, swollen with the weight of years. Barnacles crusted its edges. Seaweed threaded through its mesh, and the smell was worse than any catch. Salt, iron, and the sourness of things long drowned. No one knew whose wreck had given it up. Some said it was the remains of the Marrow's Bride, a ship swallowed whole in a storm 2 centuries past. Others muttered of whalers lost to mutiny, their corpses lashed together and cast into the surf. But the old men on shore shook their heads. "There are nets that never belong to any ship," they whispered. "Nets that belong only to the sea." The crew, poor and desperate, decided to use it anyway. Ropes were patched, weights secured, and though its cords felt brittle as bone, the net held. They rowed out beneath the fog, casting it wide across the water. When they hauled it in, the sea gave up its secrets, fish flopping, silver and gasping, but tangled among them were bones. Not fresh, not clean, but yellowed, worn smooth as river stones. At first they laughed uneasily, tossing the fragments back, saying it was drift. Old wreckage churned from the seabed. But each haul was the same. Fish and bone, bone and fish. A finger joint caught in a gill, a rib tangled in scales, a skull grinning between mackerel. The bones never sank when thrown back. They floated, circling the boat, bobbing like bait, until the current pulled them under. The crew argued. Some wanted to cut the net loose, let it sink back to where it came from. Others said it was cursed, but cursed or not, it caught fish, and fish meant coin. Hunger outweighed fear. They cast it again. Night fell as they returned to shore, their catch heavy, but their eyes hollow. They dumped the fish upon the dock, but when the baskets were emptied, bones remained, clattering across the planks. The harbor smelled not of salt, but of rot, and gulls would not land. By morning, word had spread. The villagers gathered to see the net, its cords drying stiff in the sun. No matter how they scrubbed, the smell of brine and decay clung to it. Women spat and made signs against evil. Children dared each other to touch it, but even the boldest would not. The fishermen, stubborn, returned to sea. Each day the net yielded more. Bones, yes, but not just bones of fish or beasts. A femur unmistakably human, a skull with teeth worn down to the root. Once, an entire rib cage came up, tangled tight in the cords, clattering hollow as they dragged it across the deck. Still, they fished. Still they profited, until one night a storm rose sudden and violent. The boat staggered beneath the waves, men clinging to the rails as rain hammered. The net, half cast, twisted in the wind. It snapped like a whip, lashing through the crew. When they looked again, 2 men were gone. Their cries cut short, pulled into the sea. The survivors hauled frantically, trying to bring the net in, but it fought them. It dragged, heavy, as though something below held it fast. At last they cut the ropes. The sea swallowed it, dragging it down into the black. The storm passed, leaving only silence. They thought it gone. But at dawn, smoke rose from the shoreline. Villagers ran to the pier, where the net lay coiled once more upon the planks, wet, dripping, its cords steaming faintly. The men swore they had cut it loose, sworn it lost, yet here it was, as though it had crawled back on its own. They decided to burn it. Wood was piled, pitch poured, and the net was thrown upon the fire. Flames roared, licking high, smoke pouring into the sky. The cords blackened, split, collapsed into ash. The villagers cheered, relief rising like breath after drowning. But the next morning the smell of smoke drifted across the harbor, though no fire burned. Mist curled over the water, and there it was again, spread wide across the tide, glistening in dawn light, dripping not with seawater, but with blood. From then on, no one dared touch it. Boats gave it wide berth, steering clear when its cords surfaced. Yet sometimes, when fishermen cast their lines, they found their hooks tangled in its mesh. And when they hauled them back, bones came up once more, slick and grinning. A tale grew that the net was never woven by hands, that it was made of hair and sinew, of ligaments braided tight, cast down by something beneath the waves. That each bone it caught was not a relic but an offering, drawn from those who had drowned, those the sea refused to keep still. Old sailors said it carried memory. That each bone belonged to a story. Men lost in storms, women dragged by undertow, children slipped beneath the tide. Their remains tangled forever, feeding the net, giving it weight. And when the cords pulled, it was not fish they sought, but company. Years passed, and sightings grew rarer, though not gone. Some mornings smoke still drifts across the harbor, though no fire burns. Some nets rise dripping red, though no wound is seen. And always the sea remains restless, as though waiting. Fishermen whisper of nights when their own nets come back heavier than they should. When shadows move in the water, shapes that are not fish but arms, hands, faces pressing through mesh. When the sea itself feels tethered, tugging back, the net has never gone. It only drifts, waiting to be cast again. And should you hear the gulls fall silent, should you smell smoke where no fire burns, know this: the sea remembers what it takes, and sometimes it gives it back.